Welcome back to Crime in the Courtroom, everyone. Glad to have you with us once again. John Collins here with you, and I'm really looking forward to another great conversation with another really interesting guest, that being Caitlin Burchill, an investigative reporter for NBC Connecticut. We're going to take advantage of the time that we have with Caitlin to learn a bit about investigative reporting, what it's like to come to work every day as an investigative reporter, focusing on stories that are covered specifically because something bad is going on, or something nefarious or malicious, and a decision has to be made that the public needs to know about it. And why does the public need to know about it? Well, because the public has a responsibility to hold its leaders and influencers accountable, and you can't do that unless you have the right information, and that is the business that Caitlin Burchill is in. Before I introduce Caitlin, I'm delighted to also introduce to you my good friends and colleagues at Promega, host of the International Symposium on Human Identification, the largest conference in existence that is dedicated to the practice, challenges, and opportunities of forensic DNA testing. For over 45 years, Promega has been helping scientists find the answer. Going beyond a focus on products, we bring a network of diverse ideas and solutions to drive better results, not only for our criminal justice system, but to protect and preserve our quality of life through the life sciences. Promega, turning questions into discoveries. Learn more about Promega at promega.com. So, a little bit about Caitlin Burchill, my next guest. She began her journalism career behind the scenes in Boston and later as a reporter in Bangor, Maine. Caitlin has now been an investigative reporter with NBC Connecticut since 2022, specializing in consumer affairs, where among the things she says gives her the most joy is reuniting members of the public with their hard-earned money. Not a bad thing. In her first 6 months on the job, her reporting changed the policy of a major cruise line, and an undercover investigation pushed the state of Connecticut's international airport to make its parking garage safer. She received high levels of recognition when she and her colleagues won a 2023 New England Emmy for Best Larger Market Morning Newscast. She's been nominated for other Emmy Awards while working in both Connecticut and in Utah. Before returning to New England, Caitlin was a reporter and fill-in anchor at KSL in Salt Lake City, Utah, where she covered stories ranging from out-of-control wildfires to a Utah Jazz playoff run. I recently had a chance to speak with Caitlin about her interesting career, about investigative reporting in general, and more specifically, a story that is relevant to many of my listeners and viewers, which was the recent challenges to the past work of famed forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee. I hope you enjoy this conversation with NBC Connecticut's Caitlin Burchill as much as I did. So, Caitlin, you grew up, I think I read in Massachusetts, and at some point, it may have been one of your first gigs, was out in Salt Lake City. Tell me about what took you out to Salt Lake City. That's kind of a cool town. I've spent some time out there. Did you enjoy your time out there? What was that like?
I did. It was a totally, so, I'm from right near Boston. It was a totally different world, Salt Lake City mountains, like what? It was magical. And in this business, you kind of, in the normal projection of how you go is you kind of start in a small market and you work your way up. So that's what I did. I was working behind the scenes at in a Boston market the year that Whitey Bulger was captured. The Bruins won a Stanley Cup, which is cool if you're from New England, of course. Then I did Bangor, Maine, and then Salt Lake City, and then Connecticut. So Salt Lake was an incredible experience, a really big television market, and a lot of unique stories, let alone weather, right? I mean, I never knew tractor trailers had to chain up, which maybe you're used to in your neck of the woods, but that was different for a Boston girl. So it was really cool.
I did some work for a short time with Franklin Covey, which is a big, Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, yeah.
He co-created a company that's based in Salt Lake City, and I did some consulting work, contract consulting work for them for about a year, and that kind of blew up when the pandemic hit. But I got to spend some time out there. It's a really neat town. Would you describe Salt Lake City as a more conservative town, or how would you describe sort of the political atmosphere there?
I think I would say conservative. It's a fascinating experience to be in a place where religion is so prominent, right? In Boston, people are religious, but it's not necessarily part of part of who they are necessarily, how they might introduce themselves. When you're in Utah, you might say this is this is the temple I go to, right? It's very much a part of the community. Sundays were spent in church. So it was really in temple, excuse me. Fascinating. The most kind, welcoming folks, whether you're part of a religion or not part of the religion, it didn't matter, but it was definitely a very big part of their lives. And I will say, it's nothing if you weren't born into that religion, it might be hard to report on it. So the station was pretty understanding of, let's not put Caitlin unnecessarily covering temple updates today. But everyone was so warm and welcoming, and it was a great place. So really different. And it's cool to move somewhere else and just have a different experience.
Oh, of course. And I think when I think about investigative reporting, there's a fine line between what you do and what police officers do. I was thinking about this ahead of our conversation, that police officers investigate crimes with the understanding that there's most likely to be some form of adjudication or criminal proceeding that's going to take place. However, in your line of work, you're conducting investigations where the outcome you would expect is that the public is going to hold somebody accountable, potentially because of something that you're reporting. Do you think that's a fair characterization? And sometimes do you find that the public doesn't respond the way that you thought that they should? In other words, you thought that it was a bigger story that required more of a reaction than what you got?
Really interesting what you said, because it's true, right? When I started my career, I was a general assignment reporter. So that means you cover the news of the day. What's important now? The fire that maybe lots of folks aren't no longer living in that house, or we just had a seal that flopped up in the middle of a New Haven during a snowstorm. And of course, the seal might gain more attention than the story that's really impactful or maybe that needs attention. But at the end of the day, you might say, oh, that's, it's interesting to see what people are talking about afterwards. But I just hope when I cover a story or go to a story, you're telling the first draft of history. That's kind of how I think about it. Less so of like, how are people going to perceive it? It's like, okay, this is what's happening right now. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we know. We'll keep you posted when we know more. So that's kind of more how my site is. But definitely it is interesting. I always think about sometimes we have good relationships with police officers because we're kind of there together, but our final result is very different.
What drew you to investigative reporting?
So I just wanted to play college volleyball. I had no idea. But looking back, I'm fascinated by people. I'm really curious. So I think as a child, I was like that kid always asking questions, super curious. And now that once I kind of caught the bug and I did an internship, I'm like, I love this. I love kind of knowing what's going on, helping people understand it, and also giving people a voice. I think that's really, really important. And especially, in these days, and we'll probably talk to that later, but there's just, I just got the itch. I got the bug, and it's a little bit addicting because you're like, I want to help people. I want to get that knowledge out there.
Well, I can understand why you were the captain of your volleyball team in college. I read that because as a captain, you need to advocate for your team. I was on the track team at Michigan State, so it had a big impact on me even to this day. Those experiences. Are there certain kinds of stories that you gravitate toward? Obviously, the number of stories that are out there potentially are limitless, and so you've got to narrow your focus somehow, which is probably challenging because you've only got so much time and so many resources. What kinds of stories do you like to go after, and how do you make those choices?
So how we figure out a story, it depends on your job. So if you're a general assignment reporter, and that's usually the journalists that you see covering that fire, covering that daily news of the day, they actually come in the morning or the start of their shift. Maybe it's the 2 a.m. shift. That's what I did in Utah. It's really early. But you kind of just like look at the totality of what are we hearing on police scanners? What's on social media? Have we received emails, press releases? And you kind of filter through with a team and figure out what's the most perhaps impactful story of the day. And it's hard. Like we mentioned earlier, sometimes you pick something and everyone's like, they may fall asleep during that story. And you hope that's not the case, but it's a team effort to decide the stories. And in my position now, so I worked as that day-to-day reporter, and now I'm an investigative reporter. So it's awesome. I get to take time to dig into something, get tips to think about it. It's not necessarily like I have to be on TV every day. So that's really nice.
Yeah, the story that sort of caused our paths to cross was the well-known Henry Lee story, the famed forensic expert that got into the news for reasons that I'm sure he didn't expect and didn't want. And so we're going to have a chance to talk about that coming up here shortly. But aside from that, what would you say have been some of the more memorable stories that sort of punctuated your career over the years?
I've been reflecting on this. You mentioned this question before we jumped on here, and memorable because there's some that are really happy memorable, and obviously there's some awful ones. In my current role, I'm actually a consumer investigative reporter. So I help people maybe get their money back, or I help people in consumer problems. So helping people get their money back has been glorious. It's so nice to be able to help someone get to the finish line. Whereas, you cover a fire or you cover a crash or you cover a court case, you might not actually be there for the end when people move back in, or, so I actually kind of get to follow something through. So recently, for example, we helped a mom this summer get 30,000, 20, like 30, like a lot of money back, thousands of dollars, tens, $20,000 back. She refinanced her son's student loan with the bank. And then during the pandemic, when that student loan payments were paused, pandemic's over, boom, she's getting two bills for the same student loan. And the bank was like, no, nothing's wrong. It was just kind of, it's hard. Customer service isn't what it used to be. So we kind of got in and fixed the matter. They not only, paid off the bill they were supposed to pay off when she refinanced, but they forgave her some money too. So stuff like that is really cool. And then there's the awful stuff. I was in Utah working when the country music festival mass shooting. I remember. Wow. I remember that like yesterday. I was the morning reporter when I was in Salt Lake City, and all of a sudden you kind of hearing reports of a couple shot, a few more shot, and you're just like your stomach is just. And then I'm in Utah. I know Utahns are at the concert. Of course they are. We live 5 hours away, so we were there bright and early that morning.
That shooting was in Vegas, correct?
It was in Vegas. Exactly. Yeah. So we were about 5 hours away. And I remember seeing like I was like a few people at a concert, like, no one, it was dark. It was late at night. So no one's kind of knows what's going on. And we just made the decision to head that way. And it was, that is awful, and something I'll never forget. It was just tragic. And I love country music. I mean, I think anyone who could have been any one of us. And so that's memorable in a very different way than helping people get their money back.
When you're chasing down these stories, Caitlin, have you ever encountered situations where you found that your safety was being threatened? Obviously you're not a police officer. I'm assuming you don't have a gun strapped to your hip when you're out doing these stories. Has that happened?
I'm thinking about that, the festival. That wasn't even a thought, but maybe adrenaline's pumping. You're kind of just like, oh, what's happening? And I think they maybe caught the shooter at the time by then. But in other cases, I will say, for all my former bosses or bosses watching, our stations our safety is pretty paramount. So that's great. If you're uncomfortable, or they don't want you too close to the side of the road, like we have rules. So that helps. I will say, in Maine, when I was working there, I was anchor. So I was the person who was like constantly on the news desk giving folks their information. I had a crazy incident, like a stalker incident, kind of. So that wasn't great. My parents, if they're watching this, they actually don't even know that, because I just knew they would be so freaked out when I was 21 years old, 22. There was someone who would watch from prison, and he would send us letters, and he would say, okay, I'll know you can't respond, but on Monday, March 3rd, if you get this letter and you're wearing red that day, I know you got my letter. And of course you'd get the letter on like the 4th or 5th. So you're like, did I wear red the day before? Man. Yeah. And then police got involved because he was getting released. And he was a very well-known rapist. Oh, it was something. So yes, that is extreme, I will say. And it all worked out, and thankfully, and police were amazing. So that was really cool. They were looking out for a little old news anchor,
little old Caitlin.
Pup. Yeah, little old Caitlin, a young pup.
When did you come back out to New England?
That would have been in 6 years ago. 6 years ago exactly. Okay. Today. Yeah, 2019. Okay. So about a year. 2019.
And did you come in or come back to New England into your investigative reporting role?
Actually, I came back as the general assignment reporter, and then
Oh, okay.
I did.
Yeah,
Yeah, I came back in that role, and you kind of prove yourself. It's and you'll see
sure.
investigative reporters in markets. You kind of have to know the area, and I'm so lucky that something happened and people had faith in me, and the consumer role has just been lovely. And our station actually has. I don't want to say it's not a hotline, but we have like a consumer complaint form. You're right in, and we promise to respond to anyone across the country. So actually, if you're watching wherever you're watching from, NBC stations that are owned by NBC, so like us, LA, New York, Philly, these stations all have these NBC response teams. So just something to keep in mind for any of your viewers. If there's a consumer issue you can't get a handle on, write into us and we try to help in any way.
That's really good advice because people don't always think of all of the resources that are available to them, and they are out there. Caitlin, what would you say, especially for somebody that say is going into investigative reporting for the first time? What would you say is the hardest part about maybe some of the more challenging aspects of the work?
I think it gets even more like the minutia, the little details. Of course, when you're reporting, you want to have the facts correct. In this case, like to the max, and you want to do that. So I think maybe it's my own problem. Maybe I know I'm anxiety ridden, but it's really stressful because you want to have every fact right because one little dumb, stupid error, even a spelling mistake, people just lose trust in you. And I think that's really hard. And it also it's not just a Caitlin at work thing. It's kind of a Caitlin in our life. Like if I'm at a restaurant and someone catches me on video doing something dumb, there,
Sure.
it's like, she's not trustworthy anymore. So I think if that all sums it up together, it can be a little anxiety.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I think when people think of investigative reporters in the classical sense, I think they think of, I think of Bob Woodward and the Watergate, right? Maybe it might be safe to say in some ways they put that line of work on the map to a degree. That might be a little bit unfair to people that came before the likes of Bob Woodward, but the press gets, especially during campaign years, the press gets beat over the head a little bit, sometimes fairly, but a lot of times unfairly. With regards to investigative reporting specifically, what would you say is sort of the state of investigative journalism today?
I think based on everything you just said, which I think is spot on, I think it's more important than ever, especially with social media and disinformation online. I think having local investigative teams is really important. And I stress local too. Obviously, national is great, but people, I think, the word media has become this word and it weaponized it, but it's local media is really different than national media, whatever your opinions. And I think local investigators are so important to keep the public servants who are using your tax or getting paid by taxpayer to ask the questions for you. And in this time, we're in this weird time, lots of stress, lots of emotions. You just mentioned the political, there was a political election. I think in this time right now, it's to have these investigators, it's more important than ever, so people have the correct information.
Let's talk about Henry Lee. I did, just to give our listeners a little bit of a background, I did a podcast episode a while back, which you happened to catch wind of and listen to, which was when you reached out to me. About the story of Henry Lee, the famed forensic expert. He's got to be in his 80s now, and word is that there was some behaviors, professional practice, whatever you want to call it, that appear to have been problematic in cases that he worked. And you and your team did a really interesting documentary on the Henry Lee case, and I understand that there's been a development with regards to that recently. So, let me ask you this: how was the documentary received after you released it?
Sure. So the documentary we did is The Traces of Doubt, the Forensics of Dr. Henry Lee. And I will preface, John, that not a lot of local television stations have the capacity to do documentaries. So this was an incredible experience and I think important locally. Really important in Connecticut. And kind of to backtrack on your last question too, why is investigative journalism so important? Because
Sure.
news stations are cutting down investigators, and TV isn't making money. Like it's hard. So I think that's why investigations is also really important. But documentary was such an incredible experience, and I think it was so important. We're in Connecticut. This is the home of the famed forensic scientist, Dr. Henry Lee. How was it received? We haven't, it's been well received, I would say. People watch our documentary and they want to talk about it and they have questions. And really that's pretty much why we did this. We wanted to there's been a lot of storylines, like you mentioned, and we can get into that. We wanted to give people context and put this life of Dr. Henry Lee together. What is his legacy? Has he, he's had some controversies lately. Does that ruin his past? What is the impact of that? Yeah. So we put it all together, and we really hope people will watch and enjoy. And I hope your viewers too. And you were, while doing my research for the investigation, I came upon you, and I was fascinated with your take on the situation.
Henry Lee was one of the experts in the O.J. Simpson trial, I believe, too. He did I think one of the things that he did was footwear or foot impression comparison. So he's a very well-known guy. And over the years, he's made his rounds, as you know, on cable news. And one of the things as a professional coach, Caitlin, one of the reasons I took such an interest in the Henry Lee case was because I'm a big believer that there is a great, great challenge that is almost impossible to overcome when you try to perform as an authority and a celebrity at the same time. It's you cannot do it because the two compete against each other. And I think that what he was trying to do in a lot of ways was be an authority, which you have to be as a forensic expert. You have to be authoritative if you're going to go into a courtroom and testify and put potentially somebody's freedom at risk. But then also on one hand, try to be a celebrity. And it's very difficult to do. And he's really good at being a celebrity. But what it can do is it can encroach on somebody's ability to be trustworthy as an authority. Now that you've done the story, and I'm sure you're still doing some work behind the scenes on it, what was sort of your takeaway from that experience on the life and career of Henry Lee?
Well, this is why we went to you. You understand forensics, right? So as a journalist living in Connecticut, and for background, there was two men, Ricky Birch and Sean Henning, whose conviction is overturned. And part of the reason they get a $25.2 million settlement from the state of Connecticut. And part of their overturned conviction, according to the Attorney General's office, is based on Dr. Henry Lee's interpretation and how he testified on the stand at their trials. He said there was blood on a towel. The Attorney General's office now saying there was not blood on this towel. Very important in this case. So we hear that, and you kind of just go, huh. And obviously, you're a forensic scientist. I'm not. So I started to think, well, what are forensic scientists thinking about this? Wait, what are Connecticut residents thinking about this who have watched this rise to? There was just so much. There was a lot to take in, and we can do quick. We were doing quick stories, but we thought, wow, we really need to ask him some hard questions, sit down with him, which we did. We sat on my incredible colleague, Len Bastoff, sat down with him 3 different times for 3 hours, which I think is incredible. I don't know if anyone's done that ever, but just sit down with him, ask some questions, and bring up and talk to experts. I'm not an expert, but talk to experts about what may have happened, what may have transpired to get here, what could be better in the future, what we could not do. And I don't have those answers, but I really hope our documentary takes all of this into context and really shows people, gives people a way to move forward after these last couple of issues.
Now, I believe you were telling me earlier that the documentary has transitioned into sort of a new phase of its production on YouTube. Can you tell me give us an update on where you're at with this now?
Sure. So it used to be, it's just now on YouTube in totality. So I think it's a lot easier for viewers to access. So we hope you can check it out. It's been on in this sense for a little bit now, in totality. So just, Traces of Doubt NBC Connecticut, boom, right there on YouTube for folks and viewers to check out. And we worked on it for 1 year while still doing my consumer stuff on the side. I still had to be on television, do everything else. But we just thought it was really important for not just Connecticut, for folks, anyone invested in forensic science, in a lot of these big cases, the wood chipper case, you name it, just people who might have interest in true crime, like just to look at this all together, and look at the past and present. And that's what I think is very unique about our documentary is we have footage from the Phil Spector case. I mean, we're NBC, we were there. So kind of putting this all together is unique. So you'll see that on YouTube, and I really hope you'll check it out.
And for our listeners, we will put a link to that to YouTube on our program notes, so that'll stay with the episode on our platform. Caitlin, why should anybody that takes an interest in public safety and the criminal justice system, why should they find this documentary worth their time to watch?
Well, I think you'll get a contextual experience. You're going to, for some folks who might have lived and followed Dr. Henry, you see his rise to fame. So you're going to see, how did that happen? What led him there? What amazing accomplishments has he had? Where has he been questioned? And we questioned him on things. I mean, Phil Spector case, we said, well, you were questioned about, picking something up from the crime scene. And to this day, he's adamant that he picked up some threads. He tried to mail them back, and things like that. Even, he said there was never a mention of a fingernail, and that fingernail is very important if you're had watched the Phil Spector, Lana Clarkson case. And we challenged him on that. We went and got the autopsy report, and there was a mention of a fingernail. We wanted to get some questions answered. We wanted to get to the bottom of things, and I really we don't have the answers. I can't tell you what the legacy of Dr. Henry Lee is. But I can leave you thinking about it on your own and making your own decision. So we give you a lot of information, a lot of fascinating knowledge. And I think people will be really invested into it, really like it.
Doing a story for a full year, that's remarkable. And the effort that had to have gone in to chase down this information and the relevant evidence and sorting that from the evidence that might not be so relevant, I have a feeling that most of us probably can't fully appreciate how challenging that was.
It was, yes. And while still having to maintain I have to still be on television and do some consumer stories because we're a local news station. They count on me for that. So that was really hard. But yes, so for us, it was, my colleague Len Bestoff would interview Dr. Henry Lee. We'd ask him some questions, and then we'd say, okay, let's fact check him. So now we're going through trial testimony from the 1980s. Now we're looking at, Dr. Henry Lee had his own television show called Trace Evidence. He was acting out how he thought crimes were portrayed while he was working as the head of state police in Connecticut. So then it's like, okay, now we're trying to get the footage. We were able to get some rights to share that with you all. And really this kind of compare and contrast what he said versus maybe what we found. And it was a very big lift. Traveled the country too. I went to Louisiana. My colleagues went to Baltimore, New York. Yeah, it was a big effort, but I think you'll see what was put into it. And we're able to find things people have never seen as well. So crime scene photos, documentation, knives that were in question in other cases, we track them down. So very big lift, but I hope for the viewers it's worthwhile.
Is there a possibility of an additional installment to this later on down the road? Are you still sort of kind of tracking on the story?
Absolutely. We are in the case that sparked this these questions of like, what's going on here? That Ricky Birch and Sean Henning case, they're still one of the men is still suing a local police department. So we're following that. And that also, and I know you've mentioned this on some of your podcasts too, of the systemic, it's not just forensic science that determines something. You have forensic science, you have an argument. It's the totality. So there's so many different layers of this, and we could have done a 10-hour series. So yes, we will continue to follow it. But I think the entire show and what we found says, what are there checks and balances? Are there, um, it just makes you think differently. So we will be keeping track of all of that.
I have a guest that I hope to have on before the end of the year. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was a judge in
Ooh.
the Midwest, and one of the things that makes him so interesting was that he at one time was one of only, I believe, 9 judges in the United States to also have a PhD. And he did his dissertation for his PhD was on forensic evidence. And I actually had him come speak to my staff when I was the director of the Michigan laboratory system, and we brought him into Lansing, and he gave a really great presentation. But he talked about what he called the CSI effect,
Mm.
which was this idea that, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, and even as you reflect back on the Henry Lee story, that really the impact that a forensic expert like me or Henry Lee or anybody else, the impact that that expert has to a large degree is dependent upon the notions that the jury members have of forensic evidence, which can be shaped by what they watch on TV and in the movies and these types of things. And if you add to that the fact that you're dealing with a forensic expert who also happens to be I'm using air quotes here, a celebrity, it can really amplify the problems that might arise if it comes down to pike, or if it's determined that there might have been something wrong with the way that this individual did their work at the crime scene or in the crime lab, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And while we were doing all this research and digging things up, it was some news stations in the past had interviewed someone who was on the jury, right? And kind of we have, their reaction to Dr. Henry Lee. And you can see that even now, his show came out really in that CSI effect era, right? People are fascinated. He's done so many cool things. He's brought rape kits to Connecticut. Imagine if we didn't have those. So it's fascinating. And that's why we wanted your expertise on this, especially, this is a person, Dr. Henry Lee's touched, he says 8,000 cases. And he's adamant. He's never made a mistake. So, and I think that's what's interesting about, you mentioned experts and in your episodes, or people who have expertise, like to what end, and how do people take that on? How do people take it in if they're in a jury? It's fascinating.
Caitlin, it's interesting that you bring that up. When back and obviously I haven't been around as long as Henry Lee has, but I started my career in 1993. And back then, when we were trained as forensic experts, we were trained to tell people that we never made a mistake. Like, there's no possibility I could have made a mistake. And one of the things that we understand now, and this is something when I teach my expert witnessing workshop that we spend a lot of time on, is that the moment you tell somebody that there is no potential that you could have made a mistake, you basically just admitted that what you do is not science. And people forget this, because science exists because of the potential for error. So if you say that there's no possibility for the potential for error, you just advertised everybody that what you do is not science. And so I push back really hard against anybody, really in any profession, whether it's a forensic scientist or a doctor, when they suggest that there's no possibility that I could have made a mistake. It's one of the worst things that an expert that claims to be a scientist could say. And some of that we think differently now, though, too. So that's a good thing. We evolve, right?
You're saying that, yes, as you're saying that, I'm like, I feel that spiritually as a journalist, right? It's like I'm trying to be perfect. I don't want people to think, but yes, what you're saying makes so much sense in any profession. I can totally see that. Wow.
What kinds of things are you hoping to do in the future, Caitlin, as far as not only maybe specific stories, or just even the types of stories that interest you and that you hope to sort of sharpen your teeth on?
I hope we follow up with this. I hope we can get more eyeballs on this project. We worked so long and hard on it.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. I hope to continue helping consumers. I think it's just so important. We actually, the NBC response team during the pandemic, or a little bit post-pandemic, did kind of what's the state of customer service, right, in our country? And I think, as people have to cut costs and slim things down, you're seeing maybe less customer service folks, or maybe more people who are working from home and might not be able to get all the answers. And it shouldn't be all on them, but I want to be there to help people who can't get through to customer service. How many times have you been on hold for hours? And it's to no fault of the person who picks up the phone. It's just the systemic problem of businesses and corporations and life. So I hope to be there for folks and help them navigate that journey. It's unfortunate that viewers might need a me in any other station that has this response team or consumer team, but it's an honor to help people. If I could do that, that would be my goal, especially as money is tight, as we're inflation and life, and every dollar matters. So the more we can get back to folks' pockets that maybe is stuck somewhere where it shouldn't be, that's what I'm hoping to do.
Am I correct, Caitlin, in saying that in a lot of states, the state's attorneys general have consumer protection offices, and are those I know that there's a separation between government and the state, but do you find, as an investigative reporter that specializes in consumer affairs, is the state attorney general a potential resource for you in certain cases? Tell us about that.
Absolutely. And obviously it's different state by state. So I can only speak here in Connecticut, but a lot of times if it's like something that we will refer people to Connecticut Attorney General. If it's something like, I don't think this is like really how I can't help you, but let's go to them. Or even, hey, come to me, but let's maybe have you should report it to the state too. You should report it to the BBB, or just so there's a record of perhaps if it's a scam. Like let's get this on the books so that other folks know the word could perhaps be spread. So Connecticut, the Attorney General's office is been great and has been a helpful partner with us. And helping us get the word out, and vice versa, about different trends that we may be seeing. So that's been a really cool partnership. I can't vouch for every state. But that is nice. It's a nice thing for Connecticut folks.
What advice would you give, let's say, a journalism student coming out of college that's interested at some point in becoming an investigative reporter, getting into that line of work? What advice would you give somebody as they start into their career?
Ooh, I think I would say, if you're curious, that's a great start. So you're ready.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, curious. And I think if you're ready to hustle. I mean, when I got a job in Utah for a 2:30 a.m. start, that's a little brutal. That's the thought of it, right? You're like, oh, that is early. But I mean, it was a wonderful experience. You get to meet people. You get to do things you never want to do. So maybe having some flexibility, ability to work hard, but no, you may need to move around the country. You may have to work really odd shifts. You're going to go into work when people have a snow day. That kind of basics it's a reality for this job. And yeah.
Well, Caitlin, I can't tell you how much I appreciate. I know you're busy making the time for us and having this conversation. I want to just kind of put a personal point on the Henry Lee case. I really thought that the story was fairly done. It wasn't a hit piece. It wasn't out to get Henry Lee. It wasn't trying to defend him, but it was really, I think, as you said at the start of our conversation here, it was an effort to try to understand who this guy is, what his reputation is, the kinds of cases that he's working, and you really kind of left it up to the viewers to decide for themselves what they should think of this guy who's had an amazing. He has done a lot of great work over the years, and he's had an amazing career, and he's got a really infectious degree of energy. I've seen him speak at conferences. He's a really impressive guy. But sometimes those are the type of people we have to be the most cautious with. And so I thought your story was really, really fair. And I'm going to put a link in our program notes, and I want to encourage our listeners and viewers to take a look at it. I think it's worth their time. So let's close by saying, or having you tell us, Caitlin, if anybody wants to get more information on you or your team, where do they go? Where do you point them?
Well, I appreciate the kind words coming from you, and thank you for your expertise for our story.
My pleasure.
It was incredible. I should shout out, it was an 8-person team who worked on this. So I want you to know, behind the scenes editors, and if you see it, there's a lot that went into it. Graphics. So 8 people. So when you're watching it, don't just think of me. the whole team here. So thank you so much. And please, on social media, NBC Connecticut, you can find us there, and Caitlin Burchill. See in all eyes, Caitlin Burchill on Instagram, and it's Burr, I have a chill, Burchill. Instagram, Facebook, wherever else there is on social media. But please, I'd love to connect. And it's always great to meet new connections like John. Now we're connected for life. You're stuck with me.
Absolutely.